Some ideas, they shake you out of your sleep like when a toddler creeps. Totality of the deep, the mere thought of an unconscious manifestation carried out with the beat. Positive charged protons creating neural explosions. Time hiccups when fingers and pads touch. Dead air smiles because it knows what's coming. The countenance of the clock claps hands. The choreography of the knot slaps jams. And you be like, who made this? Vertebrae responding to the call so bad they make a B-girl curve the wall. Picture this. Underneath the margins, your words can breathe. Got your listeners tilting isosceles the way you holding volcanic quills, spitting decrees. Better believe it flows like these. You got gills, screaming at daffodils or dreaming in mandrills, derivative of skills. You're built in the workshop, rocking with ra. Cause in life, the woodshed don't stop. It don't stop. It don't stop. Don't stop. Let's take you on a time jump, virtual zoom, bringing it back to Theodore's bedroom. These hands are passionately polysyllabic, putting the Jeopardy theme on swings. 10 dons giving predictions, balancing vibes like the sons and daughters of Ipwan. Ear to the underground, flicking off. Peppermint, fresh experiment, let's go. El Premier Elemento, you gotta take your time, press your fingers to the line. Red man, focus your mind. And once you do that, you're at the front of the combine.
What's going on, family? It's yours truly, Mazi Mutafa, Executive Director of Words, Beats, and Life, here for the final episode of the inaugural Alternative Winter Break Media Arts Edition. We've had some phenomenal speakers up to this point, and you know what they always say, save the best for last. I'm here tonight with a good friend of mine. It's funny, we were talking about how it is that we met, and I feel like it's been almost 2 decades. It's got to be at least 15 years. Let me go ahead and bring this sister to the stage. What's going on, Yahsmin? How are you?
What up, Mazi? I'm doing very well. Thank you for asking. Thank you for having me.
No doubt. It's funny, we were talking about how it is that we first met each other, and the answer was another good sister who I actually got a chance to interview back probably like 2 or 3 months ago. Our good friend Layla, a photographer extraordinaire.
She's phenomenal. Phenomenal.
Well, it takes one to know one. And so part of the way that Layla introduced us was in circulating the call for submissions for the journal, and you applied and submitted an article that we loved. That was featured in the Blueprint for a Movement issue way back in the day. I feel like that's volume 3, like issue 1. That was the issue that actually led us to create the teach-in. And then mysteriously, a few years later, or maybe like a year later, then we met in person in the Bay when we brought the teach-in up there.
Was that our first time meeting?
I feel like the answer to that question is I probably came out there to prospect first before we actually did the event. But okay. I know that I traveled out to California to meet you because I don't feel like you came to the first teach-in. I don't feel like it, but maybe you did because one of the things I love the most about Yahsmin is she was definitely the kind of person to jump on a flight to get to a gathering. And so this idea of being around people, being in community has always been central, at least to my relationship with you. This idea that you want to be able to bring people together, to be empowered, to be to create spaces of collaboration. And so I wonder, as I said, this is the last in this series. I've asked everyone the same first question, which is, how much of your own family history do you know? Like, how many generations back does your knowledge of your own family go?
So I would say on my mom's side, probably 3 generations back. On my dad's side, wow, maybe 2. And I'm really hyping that up right now to get to know my dad's side. We recently lost a cousin of mine, and unfortunately we were brought together by his funeral. But in that gathering, I learned so much about the Bobo family. And I learned that, like, they're all gifted speakers. Most of them are like preachers and head some kind of ministry, but they're all musically inclined and they all can speak well and write well. And I'm like, okay, maybe that's where I get it from. But on my mom's side, I've learned that they're mainly teachers. Both her father's family and her mother's family were from like the Southwest and the Midwest, and they were all teachers. Like we're talking about dozens of kids, and like they all went into education and made a career out of that. So I know the teaching gene is in my bloodline. And then on my dad's side, the speaking and the music, even though I don't consider myself musically inclined, I love music and I want to talk about it all the time, and I'm quite obsessed with it. So I understand now why I've become so passionate about these things.
Well, this is a wonderful beginning to the story. I wonder, do you know the story of how your parents actually met?
Yeah, they were high school sweethearts. They shared a passion for music, so they would often see each other at local concerts or school dances, and they'd be rocking out to the same Motown. So I think they had the common ground of music, but they met and fell in love in high school, and have been pretty much inseparable ever since.
That's a beautiful story.
Yeah.
So I wonder, this it's important that you're able to make the connection to the things that your family has done to the things that you do. I wonder, do you remember the first time you did something creative? Like, what's your earliest memory of doing anything creative? And by creative, I don't just mean like drawing, the same thing that everyone draws. Anything that you think of as creative that have required your imagination. What's your earliest recollection of doing something creative?
I'd say in elementary school, I remember making daisy chains to like put on my head as like flower crowns and like style myself with like daisy chains. I don't know if this is something that all little girls do, but that was one of my creative outlets, literally was like making daisy chains. But in middle school, I had been so introverted in elementary school that once I got to middle school, I wanted to embrace my self-expression and kind of come out of my shell. And I was also coming into my identity as like this mixed race girl in this mostly white school. And so I started to express myself with fashion and experiment with fashion. And I brought, the trends to the school, but also like kind of came up with my own spin to dressing and using fashion as my way to express my unique identity. And I mean, it wasn't for everybody, but I certainly found like a personal freedom in it. So I think fashion has always been one of my creative things.
And we see that's still true today. That jacket is super fly.
Hey,
Can
and
we
it was on clean, so.
Can we back up? So you described yourself in elementary school as being introverted. Like, do you know where that came from, or even memories of being able to self-identify as introverted? Do you remember?
I think it was just I went to an all-white school. I'm mixed race. I feel like I didn't fit in, but I was also kind of like isolated, like kind of pushed out and not welcomed into the social circles at the school. And so that just taught me how to rely on myself, think for myself, be by myself, be okay with solitude. So it wasn't a bad thing. I think I flipped it into something positive, and learned to, sit and be in my own world and read lots of books and yeah.
I didn't ask. So, are you an only child, Yasmin?
I am not. I have two older sisters and one younger brother, which is an interesting dynamic.
Tell me more. P.S. Michael Hill just asked. He said this is a great interview. Are there ways for me to see previous? The answer is yes. They're all on our YouTube channel and on the Words Beats and Life Facebook page, archived. So the dynamic of having brothers and sisters. Hear about that? Because I'm the old. I don't have this.
Yeah, being the youngest of two older sisters was it was interesting. There was never a dull moment. I do have quite a bit of an age gap between the oldest sister and myself, and that's 9 years. So most of my childhood, she was kind of an adolescent doing her own thing. And then I have a sister that's 2 years older than me. But I can say with sisters, there can be tension, there can be competition, and I wasn't the one who wanted to engage in that. So I feel like sometimes that caused a little strain. But in young adulthood and now further into adulthood, like we're doing much better with it and we communicate better, and the competition has dissolved as we got older and kind of came into our own sense of womanhood. But having a younger brother was dope for me. Like I had the best relationship with him. I was a bit of a tomboy, so like climbing trees with him and like collecting GI Joes and watching certain cartoons, that's something I could always do with my little brother. And to this day, like we're hella tight.
That's what's up. There's nothing like growing up in a family and staying connected. So many people have traumatic childhoods that they gotta spend their adulthood recovering from.
We
Um,
do. And there's still work to be done in those dynamics, like constant work, especially with my sisters. We're constantly revisiting things and trying to heal and move on from them. So, but I'm just thankful that we're on board for that.
so in middle school, you begin to discover your own. So you start in elementary school with kind of jewelry making, um, decorative jewelry, that then
Yes.
continues to evolve into middle school with fashion. Um, and the interesting thing about fashion, especially if you're an introvert, the idea that people would walk up to you and be like, "Ooh, that's a fly," like you would start to get attention that maybe your introverted self might not have wanted, but growing into your own creativity, suddenly you want to be in the spotlight. You want people to recognize your creativity, your brilliance. Um, do you think that did something happen between elementary school and middle school that triggered that you can think of?
Well, my interaction with hip hop happened. I mean, like polka dots were in and like the hammer pants were in and like patent leather shoes. I don't know about the East Coast, Mozzie, but West Coast, that's what we were taking cues from hip hop culture. And I felt empowered by that. I felt inspired by that. And it was exciting. It was fresh and it was a break from the norm. And it was a break from white suburbia because I was bored as fuck out there. Sorry, excuse my language.
Everybody curses and then excuses themselves. Like if they know what it means, they've probably heard it before. Um, so hip hop cues. You talked about the love of music. I'm curious. Do you remember who introduced you to hip hop? Was it the radio, or was one of your older siblings? Do you remember how you got introduced to hip hop?
Yeah, definitely my eldest sister Nicole, and her friends from the neighborhood. At that time, we were living in Antioch, California. Very small town, very blue collar town, not much to do. So we would put on the radio and they would dance and they would try their best to emulate the break-in styles from the East Coast at the time. And I just remember being so hyped about it, but still being relatively young and shy. So I wasn't ready to dance, but I definitely loved the music and loved the rhythm and embraced all of it.
And I'm curious how it is that your siblings exposing you to it, um, how that impacted what you had access to. Like I remember when I was a kid, my older cousin Dana, he lived in Ohio and he moved in with us in Maryland, and he introduced me to NWA. Like I hadn't heard it or had access to it. How do you think that the kinds of music that your siblings and their friends were listening to, like was it a broad range of music? Was it narrow? Like thinking back.
It was pretty broad because we were importing the East Coast lyricism and we were listening to artists from New York mainly. But then I had an awareness and with like local artists like Too Short. I mean, not as a young child, but I remember like maybe like fifth grade and up. Too Short, later on E40 and the Click. I loved the Click. So I was very well aware of the local artists that we had, that was our flex during the time. So yeah, and then just the radio, like I remember getting my first little radio and like recording the, you could put a tape in and like record the hip hop hour from a local radio station. And I remember doing that after my oldest sister taught me how to make my own tapes, essentially. She would make me some mixtapes as well. And I would just consume all of it all the time.
I love it. I was on Facebook earlier today, and a friend of mine had this post that said that we're part of Generation X, that we were the first generation to record music off the radio onto tapes. This idea
Yeah.
that like mixtapes have played an integral role in our participation in the culture. So we weren't just witnesses; we were appreciators of the curators and curators ourselves. Um,
Yeah.
so even though I interviewed Davey D and Jeff Chang earlier in this series, they didn't talk very much about specific musicians. I'm curious, especially because your introduction was East Coast, but then you got introduced to the folks on the West Coast and the work that they were doing. Who were some of those? You mentioned E40 and the Click. I didn't even know there was a Click. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
You mentioned a couple of folks. Can you talk about maybe even beyond music? Because you talked about witnessing dancing. Were there dancers from the West Coast who you witnessed or who influenced the way you thought about hip hop? The same thing for music. Um, paint a bigger picture. Paint a bigger picture.
Yeah. I think there were dance styles from that were originated on the West Coast that I admired and loved. I'm not the best dancer. I'm just not in touch with my body like that. But there were styles that I liked. In terms of specific dancers, unfortunately, no, because they really didn't have the media hype that like dancers had from New York. Um, I don't know that crews even had names out here. But so yeah, definitely dance styles. And then in terms of like local lyricists, I mean, there's Too Short. I mean, I was a fan of Hammer too. I loved Hammer. I kind of outgrew it. It was a little too pop culture like for me as I got older because I really found myself lost in the songwriting from certain artists. Like, and that's what inspired me to develop my love of writing was just the lyricism from my generation, like Rakim, and even like Souls of Mischief a little later on when I was a little older. Their writing style, loved it. It's very inspirational.
And huh, what kind of inspirations did you draw from them? Was it around particular uses of metaphor or alliteration? How did the music influence your writing?
Absolutely. And then also current events, like however they infuse what was going on in the world at the time or in the communities that we lived in at the time, and how they reflected on that and how they criticized that and how the things that they wanted to do to change those conditions. I think that lyricists were my first love and my first move toward writing and becoming a literary um, icon myself. I mean, I'm still getting there, but still, when I need to hype myself up and inspire myself to get into a writing mood, I have a certain playlist with certain artists that I want to listen to, and that's how I get my own creative juices going.
That's what's up. I'm curious. So last time we checked in at school. We're in middle school, um, and you're talking mostly about fashion. Are there any opportunities where you begin to write during this phase, or does that happen in high school?
I was definitely writing, but I wasn't sharing and I wasn't thinking of myself as a writer. It wasn't until later when teachers were like, yo, you have to do something with this, like you're gifted. And I was so surprised because my own family hadn't really picked up on that. And so I would say teachers were my first supporters, some of my friends definitely. And then, I mean, once we had internet access, like that helped me. It helped like wildfire. Like it really inspired me.
So I'm curious because you talked about teachers. Are there names of people that you still remember? Just so you know, I'm trying to unearth memories because one of the things that this is like a trip down memory lane, remembering Mr. Such and Such or Doctor Such and Such or Mrs. Such and Such, to lift up their names and to acknowledge their influence on your life. So are there teachers during this phase who are seeing some of your writing for class, or even some of your creative writing that might be, or journalistic writing that's outside of class?
Yes. Mrs. Cookston was my freshman English teacher in high school. And so we read the autobiography of Malcolm X. And I think some of my reflections on that work, she was just blown away by. So Mrs. Cookston, once she read my personal writing, she definitely urged me to stay with it and to keep up with it. And then later on, my sophomore and junior year, I had a teacher named Mrs. Laird. Her name was Jean Laird. She let me call her Jean. And she would just, wow, she was specifically impressed with like essays that I would write. And also she gave me the freedom to choose the subject matter and the content, and then would coach me if needed. But I remembered long talks with Jean about continuing with writing and that possibly being a major in college, and never letting go. She never wanted me to let that go. So those two teachers, I would say, stood out the most.
And what kind of opportunities were there for you to write as a high school student? Sorry, what high school did you go to?
I went to Northgate High, and sometimes I would find like writing contests in local newspapers, and I would apply. Or I would see a tiny ad in the back of a magazine, and I might submit some work. I remember once I won an award for a Martin Luther King Jr. essay contest, and I still have it. It was, I believe it was handwritten. And I was so thrown off because after winning, I didn't know I was winning the award, but I went to the award ceremony just to show up and show love for whoever won. And then Jean was there, and I'm like, what are you doing? And then my family shows up, and I'm like, wow. And then they tell me I need to read in front of like 300 people. And I'm like, yo, I was so nervous. I was like almost physically ill, but I did it. I got through it, and it was like a standing ovation. And that's that moment when I knew, like, okay, this is something I could do with my life. And it comes so natural. I love doing it. I'm always thinking about it. Why not run with it?
And what grade was that?
That was 11th grade in high school.
And I think we were talking earlier about something you did your senior year in high school connected to the Panthers.
Yeah. And I coincidentally, in one of the same periodicals, I found an ad in the back, and it read a need for volunteers to work with former Black Panthers in Berkeley. And they worked out of like a printing press office. They had a publication called The Commemorator. And wow, it's almost hard to describe what an honor it was to work with former Panthers. That's like a Bay Area legacy, but then also like it has national magnitude as an organization. So I met some of the elders. I saw how a printing press works, which was a wonder for me at the time. And I got to meet, different editors and different writers. But I wasn't writing for that paper. I was really trying to like help them hype the paper among youth on high school campuses, on local community college campuses. I would even show up to parties and try to get like signatures to sign up for the paper so they could get a subscription. Whatever they needed me to do, I was all about it. I wasn't going to say no to former Black Panthers. Never.
I love it. Part of my conversation with Bakari Katwana as a part of this series was learning about all the work he did as an editor for Third World Press, and how reading other people's work and working with other writers helped to influence his writing. I'm curious how access to a particular paper and this elders, how do you feel like that impacted your writing or your approach to the power of writing?
Well, it gave me hope that you could do it on your own. You didn't need a publishing house to endorse you or validate you as a publication, but also just the idea of being an independent writer started to blossom in my mind. And then again, this was like in the earliest days of like internet access. So I was like, wow, this could actually happen. You don't need a contract with a publishing house to put yourself on. You put yourself on. Um, so yeah, I would say that was a big nod for my own aspirations.
That's what's up. And so, did you go straight to college from high school, or did you take some time off?
No, I actually graduated from high school a year early. I was over the whole high school scene. I was in a hurry to get to that academic level, and I went to a community college first. And there I kind of dabbled in a few different departments in academic discourse, but I kept on working on writing and I kept volunteering with the commemorator.
And so, where did you volunteer while you were in college that allowed you to continue to develop your writing, or where were you publishing or trying to be published?
Well, really at that point, I was just writing and sharing it with certain professors. And I didn't even want to write for like the school newspaper at the time, but I did share my work with other peers and many department heads just for that validation, just to know that I'm doing the right thing and that I'm improving in my craft. And I got a lot of coaching and support from them.
It almost feels like this is like a reemergence of the introvertedness that the writing allows you to get it out, but it's not for everybody. When do you feel like you make that jump? Because I know that you've been published on blogs, you published your own blog, you've been published in multiple publications. So when did that jump go from I'm kind of holding this creativity close to I want to share it with whoever is interested in seeing it? When did that happen?
I had one of my best friends, her husband, read something I wrote, and he was like, he invited me over for coffee with her, and he sat me down and was like, you have to do this. Like, I want to know what your plan is, like what your next steps are. And it came, that kind of support came from the least expected place. He and I didn't even interact very much, but after reading my work, he basically became my cheerleader. And I knew at that point, okay, I've heard this from so many people that it's something I need to take more seriously. But bear in mind, at that point, I was juggling being a very young mother as well. So I had to time my writing and my discipline with writing alongside the responsibilities of having 3 young children at home. So I couldn't go full throttle like some other young writers could. I had to find that balance with home life as well. But yeah, after that talk and that coaching session, it was no longer deniable.
Well, I'm curious. How I know that you said that it was one of your best friends' husband, but how did he get access? Did she share it with him, or did you?
She did, and she didn't even tell me she was going to do that. Yeah, she didn't even tell me, so I was taken totally by surprise, and it was humbling too. It was humbling.
And did she say why she decided, or better yet, why did his opinion about it? Why was it so impactful? Like, who was he to you? Was he, or was it what he said? But why was his opinion kind of this catapulting force to make you move forward?
Well, he was a reader like me. He's a bookworm like me. So when you know someone loves books of any genre and then steps to you like, why aren't you an author? Why aren't you writing? When are you going to be writing your story? or at least telling the story of someone else, like, when is this going to happen? I took that serious because he's a bookworm. To me, that's important. Those are some of the greatest judges, or people who consume large amounts of literature.
So, so you get this kind of catapulting force from a source whose opinion matters to you. How old are you at that time? Do you remember?
Probably mid-20s.
So you're mid-20s. So this is still like a kind of figuring out the direction, even though writing has never left you, it's been with you this whole time. What are the things that you decide to start writing about, particularly that you publish for other people? And then maybe what's the difference between that work and the work you were writing for yourself?
I started reviewing local. So one of my first published pieces was a friend of mine was a playwright, and I went to her play. And the whole cast were just students from her school. And so I wrote a review for that play, even though it's kind of hard to be objective when it's your friend. And that piece was called Just Another Night in Baghdad. And the play was also a fundraiser for children who had been afflicted by the conflict in Iraq. And then from there, I started to gain interest in, because I love hip hop so much and I love rap music so much, I was like, man, it would be dope to just start interviewing rappers that I have access to and talking to them about their process, about where they want to take their music, about how they're distributing their music on their own. So most of these artists were like unsigned and just independent. And so I started making like short lists of people that I wanted to work with and reaching out, kind of like cold calling in a way. And it was a shot in the dark, but 9 times out of 10, I got a response, and I ran with it.
How did you have access? You said through MCs you had access to. Was that direct access or friend of a friend? Like, is it just kind of a Bay Area thing? How did you get that initial access? Because I know lots of young people and even young adults who want to move into a space are like, but I don't know anybody. How do I build those relationships? I love the fact that you talked about cold calling, but were there also people that were part of your immediate community?
Yeah, some of them were artist circles that I ran in, but also I used like MySpace a lot. People I followed on MySpace, and I would, reach out to artists, just go into the DM and ask, pitch myself, as an independent journalist. And then we had something back then called listservs, basically mass mailing lists through email. And if there was an artist on the listserv and I knew they were a recording artist or a performing artist, I would like hit them up personally and just be like, well, what do you think about, interviewing with me or speaking with me about your work? And very approachable people. So I used social media and email to hit people up. And sometimes I would go to a show, because I attend a lot of live music events. It's one thing I forgot to mention earlier. My dad is a Latin percussionist, so he plays the conga and the bongo, and I grew up going to concerts. Like, we were always at some kind of live music event. I don't remember very many weekends or summers without live music. And so as an adult, I found myself attending a lot of concerts and shows, and I would be bold enough to approach an artist or try to get to the manager and ask for an interview, or offer to like review a new project that they were working on.
Yeah, one of my favorite stories is how Adisa Benjoko got into journalism. That he did a press. He reached out to NWA to do one of their very first interviews in his school paper. So this idea of like just having the heart to reach out to people and hope that they'll reach back. It's amazing. People back who you wouldn't. It's funny. You just jumped back in time for a second to growing up with music, and you totally missed that in the whole rest of the story. I'm curious,
I did.
where are your siblings during this like high school to college to now being a young 20 something? Are they a part of your life at all in terms of your access to culture? Are they some of the people that maybe are reading some of your work, giving you feedback, bigging you up?
Well, my eldest sister, Nicole, she was one of the people who would take me to shows and concerts. She wasn't there when I would like approach and ask, but she definitely kept me immersed in the culture of live music. And then my younger brother, he has always been just a supporter of my writing, and one of the he he was one of the first engineers I worked with, audio engineers, to produce a podcast a few years back on SoundCloud. And so he's shown me a lot of love and support for my writing over the years, and still hypes me up, definitely.
I'm curious. So we've talked. Almost all of this has been about from jewelry making to fashion to beginning to write to working in independent publishing to now being willing to produce work that you feel comfortable sharing with others. Um, did you stick with writing, or did you move into other mediums to be able to tell stories? You just talked about a podcast as an example.
Yeah, I dabbled in podcasts, and I would mainly push the material on SoundCloud. It was kind of an experiment. The first few episodes were um, interviews with some of the artists that I wanted to work with, like in print journalism, but decided let's do this over audio. And then I would also play their music. And these were independent artists, so they were happy to engage with an audience and just happy for the promo. And then a few other of my podcast episodes were my own literary work, so like personal narratives. And it was my brother's idea. My brother's name is Raj, by the way. It was his idea. He was like, let me get you in my studio and like you just record some of your personal writing. And like, I'll hook it up, I'll edit it and put it together for you. And he did an excellent job. I'm still eager to work with him and relaunch the podcast again one of these days. I actually have a vocal booth in my house and most of what I need to make that happen.
So what about it made it experimental? You said that was an experiment, trying something new.
Well, it wasn't the conventional podcast or broadcast format of like, news or sound bites or, it was my work, it was my writing, and it was very new for me to be that vulnerable, to start telling some of my own truths. I was used to telling the stories of others. So when it came time to start telling my own, I was reluctant, and I needed the love and support from family to be like, nah, you could do this, you got this. Like if you've been storytelling for others all these years, like it's your turn now to tell your own. And but there was some vulnerability, and that's not always easy for a writer to put yourself out there like that.
I'm curious. So this idea of your writing being about other people and wanting to, and something you talked about reviewing the play, but also reviewing music. What was that about? Trying to lift up, or was that also about being critical of things that you didn't necessarily like? So, like, what motivated you to want to do that kind of writing, to do these kind of editorial or reviews of music or events?
Definitely to lift up. And most of these artists were people that were, weren't being highlighted or didn't have the headlines. So I wanted to help them bring awareness and hype to their work. But also, I'm so fascinated with the creative process of recording artists and performing artists. So I really wanted to get into their head. Like, I'm curious about what makes a human being brave enough to speak that truth and share their music and do it on stage and and take risks and face criticism. So I wasn't necessarily critical. For the most part, it wasn't criticism. It was hype. It was love. I was showing love.
I mean, you talked about the influence of rap music in particular on your writing process. What are major takeaways from having interviewed these artists about their process that maybe you apply to yourself or maybe are just useful for people in general? Things that you feel like you learn from interviewing musicians about their process.
One of the things that I've learned is that traveling informs their work. So traveling informed my work too. Also, getting the right team around you to make sure that you're sustainable as an artist, right? That you have the help that you need and the people you can trust surrounding you, so that you keep the momentum and you keep giving beauty to the world.
That's dope. I'm curious. So, what have you learned about learned about building the career of a writer? I know that the writing isn't all you do, but it's where your work love is. Because I was going to say it's where your love is, but I know your love is invested in your boys. But what is it you've learned about yourself through this process of telling other people's stories, telling your stories now, that you feel like other writers, especially younger writers who might still be in that stage where they're not ready to share their work? What do you feel like you've learned about yourself through your own journey as a writer?
I've learned a lot about just the emotional labor that it takes, to write. I've learned a lot about the discipline that
what
it
does that
takes.
mean? What does that mean? The emotional labor. What does that mean?
You got to face your demons. You got to face whatever you've been through and be ready to reckon with it, not just write about it, but really take yourself through it, and you heal at the same time, but you also uncover wounds at the same time. One of my favorite writers and thinkers who's taught me a lot is Bell Hooks. She has a book called Wounds of Passion, and it's basically her memoir when she was writing one of her first books, and it took her over 10 years. For me, reading that it took that long to write a book was inspiring. It was real. You know what I mean? Because nowadays people are pushing out content pretty fast, but every writer needs to understand they have their own timeline and their own way of doing things, their own method of doing things, and that's going to look different and feel different for everyone.
That's interesting because I know how often, depending on the publication you're engaging, you have to write on a deadline, and this idea of being able to take the time to write the best version of what it is that you're trying to explore or express. How do you feel like as a younger writer you manage those two things, like the commerce of writing, the need to get things out on deadline, this idea of volume you just discussed, and then as a creator, your own love of writing and your love of language and the time that you want to take to tell the stories in ways that you know will resonate with your reader? How did or do you manage those two kind of warring priorities?
Yeah, I did a much better job when I was writing for an editor and had a deadline and worked under a deadline. So when I was actually working for or with someone else, I was much better at it. Writing for myself now and trying to finish like an anthology, that's where I'm honestly not so great. And I'm still, I'm trying to get better. And there are ways that I have to approach it differently than I did when I was answering to an editor. So that part, personal writing, aside from the emotional labor, is much more challenging than writing for a publication. Much more.
It's funny. I feel like I feel like on some levels I should change the name on my video to Game, because on all of his rap albums he always stays dropping names. I was gonna be like, so I saw Jason Reynolds talk about his own process for writing, where he assigns himself 10 pages a day. Every day he must write 10 pages. This idea of um, imposing discipline on yourself.
Yeah.
I feel like it could probably also be a theme from like the autobiography of Malcolm X. This idea that it is easier to work for someone else in the sense that they have expectations that you have to live up to. But when you're laboring with love, so if Bell Hooks said it took her 10 years to write that book, why do you feel like you're not on time with the labor that you're working on?
Well, I don't feel like I'm not on time, but I look at other people and they're like, well, what are you doing? What are you working on? You know what I mean? And I'm like, oh God, I got to answer this. It's like, it seems like it's taking me forever. Like they asked me this 2 years ago and I'm still on the same work. But honestly, that's the reality of it. I have to work on this at my own pace. And I got to be okay with that. It takes a lot of self-talk, you know what I mean? Like positive self-talk and like reframing what you hear, you know what I mean, externally. And then reframing that to fit your own methodology.
Now, I love that. I love that because the reality is that a lot of writing is solitary. A lot of writing is self-directed, and is a challenge. It's funny. All of us write, but not all of us are writers. You know, like all of us have stories, but all of us are not great at telling stories.
Yeah.
And so the reality of the discipline, the effort, the time that it takes is real. I know, as an example, you talked about teaching being in your blood right now. Let's talk about projects you're working on right now, because we've got about 12 minutes left. But
right.
I know you're teaching. We're you're working with young people. Yes.
Yeah. So I went from working in K through 8th for most of my adult life as an interventionist. And then I went back to school to specialize in what's called trauma-informed practitioner. So I essentially work with preschoolers, babies and toddlers who have suffered abuse or some kind of hardship that has affected them developmentally. And so it's a lot of small group work or even one-on-one work with the wee ones. And I love it. I love the transition from just being in a classroom with a bunch of kids to working with one or two or, just one child and nurturing and answering to their specific needs. And just knowing that I can be a part of their healing process, or at least be a loving presence in their life.
At the same time, you're working on
creatively.
Yeah, the other projects that we talked about.
Oh yes. So I'm also so I just got approached by a very prolific blues singer, songwriter, poet. She's the daughter of a phenomenal teacher here in the Bay Area, and she wants me to co-author a book with her. I would say the genre is self-help, but it's more like personal journey. So it'll be a fusion of her stories along with a step-by-step process that people need to take when they've gone through something similar, faced a similar hardship. And so she and I are committed to working with each other for the next year. We're still, going over the contracts for this collaboration, but I'm pretty sure it's good to go, and I look forward to working with her. And then I've got my own anthology that I have been chipping away at. And it's going to be a small collection of counter narratives and musings and memoirs. And I hope to put that out in the next 2 years.
And so that anthology is all your work, or that's a collaborative?
Yeah, that will be my work, solely my work.
Do you have a name? Well, no. If it's not out yet, let's not say the name so someone steals.
Yeah, it's so good. I don't want anybody biting.
On something else, and I did this for this for younger kids, or at least you want to.
Oh, yeah. Yes. So my work in the classroom and just working with small children, one of my most beloved things to do is like to have, you know, a reading circle, to read to small children. And I've always been fascinated with children's literature. Now I've thought to myself, like, I need to be the person who's writing some of these kids' books. So I'm looking to partner with an illustrator, and that's been another feat of mine in finding someone to collaborate with, because I'm not a visual artist in that way, not even a graphic artist in that way. So even though I have the words to write children's books, I do not have the artistic gift. So I'm looking to partner with someone, and it'll be a few different themes and a few different series. One of which will be like blended families. Another will be families who have a child with special needs in them, and then also like mixed race households and like biracial or multiracial children. So those will be a few of the themes.
That's what's up. That sounds like perfectly timed for America right now.
I hope so.
I didn't ask you this in advance, but can we still access your writing via your blog?
I don't have an active blog up now.
So if I was looking for writing, where would I find it? Either places that it's been published in the past? Are you still like me, one of those people that has notes on Facebook of past writing?
I'd say a Google search is the best way. If you follow my Instagram, I do put up, I'm in the process of cleaning up my Instagram profile, but I do post musings there and short work. I wouldn't call it poetry. Some people call it poetry, but it's more like musings. So I do share musings pretty often.
What's it? Can you talk to me about like what it is that you're musing about? And P.S. Why is musing? I know what musing is, but is that a particular genre of writing like poetry?
I would say it is now. Yeah, I would say it's like the love child of poetry, because it's not necessarily following a format or, you know, a poetic structure. It's almost like an observation, but a very lyrical one or a very poetic sounding one.
So what are some of the things that you're musing about? I'm not asking you to read, go like find it and read it, but I am asking like what are the things that you're thinking about that are inspiring you to write right now?
I would say love and social change or social justice. Sometimes nature, because I do have a wonderful relationship with nature, and that's helped me in becoming the woman that I am. Having a connection to nature means a lot to me. And just meditations on, you know, struggles and conflicts in life and how to get through it, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense, and it feels like what so many people. And to be honest, it feels like what so many people turn to social media for, which is kind of insights, whether those are memes or just kind of philosophical thoughts that people feel like sharing. I know I love finding a good meme to be able to share,
Yeah.
and a ratchet one too. But
Same.
I was gonna say, are all of your musings? I don't want to say positive, but like, are all of them uplifting? Are all of them about kind of like we talked about the reviews are not about being critical, but about kind of lifting up the things that you think need light. So, what are the kinds
No,
of things you're writing about?
some of them are about pain or things that I've been through that weren't so comfortable. And ironically, those are the things that resonate with people the most. So if it was about, let's say, an abusive relationship, that's not a comfortable subject matter, right?
Right.
But that is something that people can identify with. And I'd love to have like a lesson attached to that, but I think people understand that we all have our lessons, you know.
I'm not sure if you saw, but Michael Hill posted a comment that said, "Very cool that Yahsmin is working with children as a parent. She's the kind of person I'd like my daughter to be around." So this idea that you're able to bring the fact that you're a mom into childcare
Mhm.
is amazing and a gift.
I mean, children are my favorite human beings. I prefer the company of children or old people, honestly. I get the most from those two groups.
Hmm.
People around my age, yeah, y'all are right, but like I really I get the most from my relationships with children and my elders. I'm reminded of things, I'm inspired by things. It's just it's all beautiful and it's fun. Children just remind you to be fun. They take you back to that element. And I prefer to have fun right about now.
You know what's interesting? You mentioned this earlier, and we've only got a couple minutes left. But to talk a little bit more about you as a person, you talked about being a young mother, and now knowing that you've got grown-ups, you've got adult children who are living their best lives, finding their ways, contributing. I wonder how you feel like, the time that you labored to raise them, to help them become the men that they would grow to be. How you feel like now having this time as kind of like a second or third phase in your life, um, post school, then parenting, now being the mother of adult children. How do you feel like, if at all, that might inform future writing?
Yeah. I mean, empty nesting is lonely and different and can be a bit of a mind bender, but it's also an opportunity. You know, I can travel more now if I want to, even though we're in a pandemic, so that's not necessarily happening in this moment. But empty nesting is an opportunity, and I do have more freedoms now to read more without interruption, to write without interruption, to engage in self-care, which, by the way, Mazi, is something you have always asked me about as a friend. You begin most conversations off with, what are you doing to like take care of yourself, to love on yourself? And I don't know if you just asked me that because you knew I'm a mom and like moms don't usually do that, but yes, I have the freedom now to do more, that I'm a mother of young men. Um, and then also like the dynamic has changed where my kids are taking care of me now, and I got three boys, so they're like bodyguards, you know. They really look out for me in ways that I'm just so grateful for.
That's what's up. I ask you because I care about you and I know how many people are pulling you in different directions. So I always just want to make sure that you're taking care of you too, because you care for so many. This is the last question. It's, if you were giving advice to a younger Yahsmin, maybe somewhere between making jewelry and reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, somewhere in that period of your life. What's the one bit of advice that you would give you, um, not necessarily to go down a different road, but just to prepare yourself for a road that you're going to go down? What's the one bit of advice?
Wow. Probably to enjoy solitude, to not think that you're going to find yourself in a relationship with others, specifically young men. I was led to believe that, everything happens once you're with someone or you get a boyfriend or you get married or whatever. So, on the real, I think I would advise myself to be by myself for as long as I can. And that's how you become the woman you need to be for someone else if you choose to be with someone else.
Yasmin, I want to thank you so much for spending this hour with me.
You're
Um,
welcome.
I've said this in every interview. I feel like such a terrible friend. I learned so much about every single. I literally never somebody to ask all these questions. Um, I think I broke up there. So I said I feel like a terrible friend at the end of all these interviews because I learned so much about people I've known for, in some cases, 2 decades that I never thought to ask. So that's the one thing that I'm so grateful that I asked you to be here and that you agreed and that you shared so much of your story that's inspirational to the people that are watching and the people that will watch. I know it's inspired me.
I hope so.
I look forward to reading the anthology and helping you find that illustrator so we can get that children's book.
Yes.
We've got some babies that need.
That would be wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. All right, everybody. So this was the end of the alternative winter break, media arts edition. The plan is to still do an alternative spring break, which was the original inspiration for this, taking young people to cities up and down the East Coast to experience the creative economy. This media arts edition was just talking to authors, bloggers, radio hosts, DJs about the process of making media and the things that influenced and inspired them, with the hope that young people and not so young people would find value in the journeys that all of these folks have been on. I want to thank you for being here. If you're trying to find the old interviews, they've all been recorded in the month of January. They're all available on the Words Beats and Life YouTube page, which you can just Google to find it, or on the Words Beats and Life Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Words Beats Life. If you know a young person and you live in the DC, Maryland, or Virginia area, I want to encourage you to send them this link and encourage them to sign up for our soon-to-be running after-school program that starts on February the 2nd. All right? Thank you so much for tuning in.
God bless the cipher, the rotation. God bless the beatboxer's lungs. Amen for breath control. The smiles that cry open faces when flow goes unbroken. And the smoke. To stories you can see, to coming in on the one. To the SP 1200, the blue light bulb. To the board, the engineer's hands, and the limited well of patience. Hallelujah to everybody say ho. Amen to all the ladies say ow. Thank God for make money, money, make money, money. And bless every hand that was ever put in the air. In your name, we pray. Amen to that dream, that early morning conversation, the argument that birthed the idea, that unbelievable situation, the story that had to be told somehow.